This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masteringencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode. Hi, everyone. Larry Bailey here with Mortgage Workflow Partners, bringing you another read through of the release notes. This one is all about the 24.3 desktop update. We're going to go through the fixed issues that are important to understand. A lot of times, just reading the release notes on your own is okay, but hearing them explain with somebody else has a different kind of impact. And so let's get into it. We've got our very first issue here that we're going to go through in the Encompass forms and tools. Things that are fixed is the redisclosure, closing disclosure alert update for NBO. Specifically, there was an issue with the NBO not being triggered. For those that don't know NBO, non-borrowing owner, you also might call it non-borrowing spouse. NBO is more generic because it counts for people other than spouses. So the issue has been resolved. This alert now is triggered as expected. So if you developed a workaround for this, be mindful that this is now running as expected. We've got an update, fixed issue to update the address to address the AUS data discrepancy alert that's triggered when early check is run. And if you're not using early check, by the way, check your workflow. If you're not actually using early check, you're kind of missing out, especially with the AUS tracking tool, being able to just simply do it. And you can also look at running that service through web settings. So it's pretty phenomenal if you're not using early check or LQA. If you're using Freddie, again, you're missing out. That was on the bottom of page 61. We're now into page 62. If you're doing construction-only loans, this is going to be important to really talk about because construction-only loans using the full loan amount to calculate the interest is now using the full loan amount when calculating the qualifying payment amount. So if you happen to know that you had this problem, it's been resolved. Keep in mind there is a migration issue here. And what migration issues typically mean is that something doesn't necessarily work 100% carrying over from 24.2.0.3 in this case over to 24.3. So note here, for existing construction only loans for a primary residence, and that's where field 1811 was used as primary, where the qualification rate's been disclosed for existing non-active loans, and that's field 1393, your HMDA screen. Field 1724 and 1725, which are the proposed monthly second mortgage payments, are locked in 24.3 to retain current values. Now, ICE will do this from time to time on migrations because they figured that you've already done calculations on this and they don't want to basically foul up things for that have already been disclosed. So what Encompass will do is put the gold padlock on these fields to protect the data and then leave it up to you if you want to unlock those fields to let Encompass calculate based upon the new calculations. So that's what that's all about. Next one is APR tolerance violation, icon no longer displayed in error for construction loans. So if you're seeing that, that's been resolved. There's also an issue resolved for second loans no longer including proposed payment twice for the maximum total payment. I actually just saw this last week where the second lien was counting twice. Good news is that's been resolved. Thank you, ICE, for fixing that. We've got an update to the refinance cash out amount calculation for Fannie and Freddie. So it's important to know here, prior to Encompass 24.3, Fannie Mae refinance cash out amount was not calculating correctly for cash out loans because it was not taking all lender credits into account. Yeah, lender credits are a bugaboo on this one here. So if we have an issue where this could, if you had this, it could result in incorrect cash out amount values being sent to Fannie Mae when you go to deliver your loan. For the Freddie Mac, it was also not including the closing costs paid by lenders. So effectively, it wasn't doing the calculation correctly. This has been resolved. Obviously, encourage you to thoroughly test this. If you've been dinged on delivery or you've had issues with this particular situation, get over to your testing environment and check it out. It's definitely something important to talk through. Next one we've got is update to the logic that determines if prepayment penalty payoffs are included in Section 32. This is obviously really important, especially if you're paying off a non-QM loan that has a prepayment penalty. So in previous versions, the prepayment penalty amount was being included in those points when it gives us following bullets. In 24.3, it's only included when the refinance is with the original creditor, that's the QM.X2 field, and you'll find that, by the way, on the URLA lender on the top there when you click off refinance and it says, are you refinancing with original creditor? That's why that's there. The purpose of refinance field 299 was cash out with original lender or no cash out with original lender. Or, third bullet, originated by the same broker and is funded by the same creditor, or the made or is currently held by same creditor is selected. The existing loan was field. And that's the NTB, that's a net tangible benefit, field.x34, so NTB.x34. So effectively, ICE is saying, listen, we've done the research, which is why one of the things I love about Encompass and what ICE Mortgage Technology brings to the table. They can't give you compliance advice, right? But they can guide you on what they found to be compliant. It's similar, it's close, but it's very distinct. So there you go. That's a big update. If you've had this problem before, check that out. Carrying on here, there was an issue resolved with fields 2864 and 2865 no longer cleared when multiple loan templates applied to loan. So if you don't know about these fields, by the way, field 2864, I usually put on a dev form or maybe even on a custom input form. I've seen this done where folks in our workflow reviews that we do, I've seen it where folks actually will compare manually the loan template field 2864 with the loan program. Hot tip, use workflow rules to do that comparison, or other rules, milestone completion or field data entry. You get your pick. But definitely don't rely just on manually reviewing those. These are fields that you can use the .contains syntax. If you're not familiar with that, ask for help on the community. I'd be glad to help you do that. Anywho, starting in 24.3, if a loan template does not have any data for fields 2864 and 2865 or 2865, and the append template data checkbox provided on the apply loan template pop-up window when applying the loan template is selected, then the values for 2864 and 2865 are not cleared from the input form. The only time these values will be cleared from the form is if the loan template does not have any data in the fields and the append template data checkbox is not selected. So, again, if you're using, the whole point of this, if you're using these fields for business workflow automation, that was a problem that's been resolved in this release. Hopefully that helps. The next update here, we're on page 64, update for construction loans to address a difference in the principal, projected principal and interest payments amounts between Encompass and ECS, aka Mavent. So that's been addressed. Read through that if you're doing construction loans. If you notice a distinction between or a difference between Encompass and Mavent, there's your answer. Veteran information is now retained and kept in sync. Thank you, ICE, for fixing that. So historically, when a value is provided in the veteran information field, that's the VA sum.x31, which would be borrower or co-borrower. Typically, you want your veteran to be the borrower. That's the way I've always been trained and been told what to do. Now the fields are updated accordingly. However, if VA sum.x31 is modified by a business rule instead of directly in the input form, the other two fields were not being updated accordingly. These issues have been resolved. I got to be honest with you, if you had this problem before, you probably wrote a business rule. If you were updating VA sum x31, you were probably already updating these other .x66 and .x51 fields. Now you don't have to. So if you've got that business rule, it may be one more rule that you don't need to maintenance. Just saying. All right, so let's get down to page 65. FHA lender ID now indicates a branch number. So when choosing a business contact for the lender company, field 1264, and the sponsoring company, which is field 1111, the FHA management form, by clicking the address book and selecting the contact, Encompass was auto-populating field 1059 and 1060, which is the FHA lender IDs for both lender and sponsor or /agent, with the company license data entered in the business contacts tool, which is what when you click that little icon right there, that's what you're doing. Starting in 24.3, the FHA lender ID and sponsor ID will not be populated with the company license number from the business contact, nor will the existing data in those fields be overwritten. If you're looking, if you had some trouble with those situations with that, I'm not aware of this problem, but I'm guessing somebody had a problem where the company license number was being carried over. That's no longer going to happen. All right, carrying on here, error message no longer displayed when a loan is locked and confirmed using certain pricing providers. Okay, that's cool. So it looks like ICE did some work for if you're using LoanNex, Smart Pricer, LenderPrice, LoanPass, LoanSifter for Encompass, or Optimal Blue for Encompass. There's an issue resolved where the lock has been successfully confirmed, where there was an unable to find a map file for the current URL, and they give you a code. So that's been resolved. Another call out here: if your PPE is not using EPC, because we're all a big government, right? So if your product and pricing engine is not using Encompass Partner Connect, yeah, that needs to be addressed. Hopefully that's being worked on. Optimal Blue, just as a call out special for them, they got ahead of the curve and they actually have partial lock access. So they don't need exclusive lock access to the file. What does that mean? That means when you use OB and you do an auto lock, the loan gets automatically locked while you're in the file. That means your people can actually continue to work. It's a beautiful thing. So just doing that call out for product and pricing engine, part of the workflow that you should be reviewing and you should know what's happening, especially as it relates to Encompass Partner Connect. And the next one is all payment methods on interim servicing worksheet now apply payment correctly for correspondent loans with buy down data. So it's really cool. I mean, for me, it's really cool where buy downs weren't a thing. A few years ago, I helped a bunch of companies implement buy downs properly because Encompass was broken. ICE fixed Encompass for buy downs, including the interim servicing worksheet. So if you have any custom stuff, especially if I helped you with custom stuff, you probably unwind it all at this point because Encompass natively now supports buy downs along with the buy down table. So this is another call out for that, where there was an issue occurring where if the payment method except ACH was entered on the interim servicing worksheet for a correspondent loan with buy down data, the payment was not applied correctly. Issue's been discovered and found. Okay, cool. Let's get into some fixed things with Encompass Document Management, also known as EDM, in case you didn't know that. First issue fixed was files attached to document folder via AutoAssign now displaying correctly. There were issues with AutoAssign. If you've had them, you know exactly what I'm talking about, especially where the document's attached to a condition. So that issue has been resolved. AutoAssign is really cool. And by the way, keep in mind that if you're not using Consumer Connect and you don't have automatic retrieval into Encompass, that's another reason to think about actually using everything in your Encompass platform natively. More to come on that later. The next issue fixed is branch contact information now provided as expected on e-consent agreement sent to borrowers. So if you check that box down there, and by the way, I don't know anybody who's charging borrowers, but I guess that's a thing. Where it says use your company's branch address for the e-consent. So if you had that box checked, that's now working properly. I've actually never used that. But basically, OTP-enabled borrower portals, instead of sending the organization's address, phone number, it wasn't doing that. So this issue's been resolved for consents. Everything's cool. If you're doing that, hopefully, again, if you've done any workarounds, you can unwind those workarounds with 24.3. Some updates on the Encompass settings, updates to Encompass reporting database to address invalid column name error. So if you had some of that, it's been resolved. Issue resolved for single sign-on login, access settings from parent organization being applied to users and sub-organizations unexpectedly. All right, so here's the deal. If you're not using SSO in single sign-on to go so the machine is logged into your network, right, through the user's credentials, and you open up Encompass and you log in. If you've got SSO enabled, boom, they just log in. There's no credentials to manage. No more password resets. Hallelujah. But this was this was basically filtering the SSO down in the organizational hierarchy. And so that's been resolved. So here's the screenshots for that, right? And so you want to make sure that, if you're not checking use parent, you're addressing in here what is happening. So that's what that addresses. All right, the next issue is persona settings for Encompass eClose now retained when upgrading to new Encompass version. So in the past, that has plagued some folks. That stuff would be unselected. I've heard of this. The issue is now resolved where when you move to 24.3, that's not supposed to happen. So if you have that on your bingo card to do for 24.3, maybe you don't have to do it. Next one is persona settings now enforced correctly to include the timeline button. All right, so this is a tool, and in the tools tab of the persona, and I want to do a call out when we say now enforced. Another word for that is honored. So I've said this before in release notes. I started using this word honored a little while ago, and it was confusing because I didn't know what that meant. Effectively, what that meant was anything that you thought it was doing before, it wasn't really doing. So now enforced really means the same thing. So here's the deal. When using the persona tools in Encompass settings to manage access to the disclosure tracking tool, administrators can select exclude or include records. That's that right there. However, after clearing exclude include records, the include in timeline button was still available to the persona. The issue's been resolved. So it's now grayed out, deactivated, same thing for users where the persona is not selected. Okay. Just like that. Just like that on screen. All right, the next one fixed is persona access to fields. Business rules are updated for lock request forms base price. Okay, so you got field 2101, and I'm going to do another call out here. If you are an Encompass admin and you're using any secondary fields, if you want to use the fields properly, I would never use just the field ID. That field ID is just kind of what sits on the input form, which isn't really anything, typically when it relates to secondary based rules. You want to use things like lockrate.requested something, or lockrate.confirmed, or lockrate.denied. There's lots of lockrate fields, and you can go to your reporting database, go to the locks tab, and you'll see all the iterative fields that are running through there. Scroll down. I found recently that somebody was just using the field ID again for many, many, many years, and they built all kinds of really crazy in-depth workarounds. Those things can, now be unwound if they just, if you just use the fields that you want to use, make sure, again, if it's a lock requested value, that's lockrate.requested. If it's a lock confirmed, that's a lockrate.confirmed. And, check it out. So this problem that's been fixed is the issue's been resolved, and the persona access to fields business rule for the base price field are now enforced in alerts in all areas where this field is being used. So if you had some issues with field 2101, it's been resolved. Another persona access to fields business rule thing resolved here is when defining the persona's access field for a selected condition, an issue occurred for the value at the top of the rights list persisted at the top of the list when administrators sorted the values in the description list. So there's a sorting thing. It's been resolved. It's a UI problem. That's been resolved. And the settings manager policy for TPO originator now enforced correctly when importing MISMO 3.4. So if you had a settings manager to use the TPO originator policy to determine the loan originator name, it'll now keep that. I didn't realize this was even a problem, but the fields being overwritten, state license ID, phone, unit type, are no longer overwritten, and the original TPO information is retained as expected based upon the TPO originator policy. Again, this is one of those things where these are now enforced is maybe just another word for honored. So if you had that setting and it was still behaving weirdly and you did all kinds of workarounds, again, this is a call out for you to hopefully no longer need those workarounds. Another TPO item here is TPO branch LO comp plan is no longer impacted when use parent info checkbox is selected. So there's an issue with the TPO branch. So in TPO, so in external company settings, you've got the organizations like your own and internal. And in there, you've got TPO branches that kind of branch off the corporate name. And so when the use parent info was checked, when a change was made to the parent, a duplicate of the current comp plan was created. That's a problem. So the issue has been resolved and a duplicate of the comp plan is no longer created. So if you had this issue with duplicate comp plans being created and you were pointing fingers at each other, it was actually Encompass. That issue's been resolved. There you go. Hey, do you use Encompass Developer Connect APIs? We have some fixes for you. An update for the create, update, loan APIs, buy down, lock, request data has now been resolved. So check that out. This was added, by the way, on November 5th. If you looked at these release notes prior to that, here's an update. Hey, and that's the end of those fixes. Not bad at all. We're on page 71. I do always encourage you to check out the release notes changelog. Historically speaking, I would always start at the bottom because they went the first at the top and then the least or the most recent at the bottom. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but the changelog now has been resorted to the most recent is at the top of the changelog with the least recent at the bottom, like a timeline. So if you looked at these release notes prior to November 5th, check here. If you're listening to this after November 5th, always go to the link for the PDF, and I would go right to the bottom of the release notes. Right now, there's 72 pages, so if you're listening to this recording in the current PDF link is more than 72 pages. It means something changed. Check it out. My name is Larry Bailey. Thanks for listening to this. I look forward to seeing you on the community. And if there's anything we can ever help you with, please let me know. Thank you.